I want to say formally welcome to the Agile Coaching Exchange today. This is what, Vlad? Is this our 6th remote one? I think it is, isn't it? That's half the year in this form. It's fantastic. We've loved doing it. We've loved seeing people coming from all these different parts of the world and joining around these common subjects that we're really passionate and interested in. So tonight, our speakers are Mark Summers and Zia Malik, and I'm really, really pleased to have them back here. For those that may or may not know, Zia and Mark are partners in the Behaviours partnership that's been around for a few years. I first met Mark and Zia around the same time I met Helen. I was a software engineer. I'd been doing a bit of Scrum Mastery on and off for about 3 or 4 years. And it was that bit where really your organisation didn't really understand that it was a real job. And what Mark and Zia and Helen at the time, their work in that organisation did, they helped the employer to my employer to understand this Agile thing, but they also helped my employer and me to realise my potential, and I'm very, very grateful for that. Since then, as I mentioned, they've formed Behaviours. They've offered loads for the community over the years, and they do some really good stuff in the businesses that they work in. And I've worked side by side with Mark in the last couple of years in an organisation. So really, really pleased to have them today. And I'm really, really pleased to have the subject that they're talking about today as well. So please give a kind of virtual give it up or applause to them. I'll hand over to Mark and Zia.
Okay, thank you, Ben, and thank you, Ace. Thanks everyone who's turned up today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night wherever you are. It's amazing to have so many people on the screen. It's actually really difficult. I'm having to scroll through. I'm looking at everybody. I'm seeing all these massive, amazing people, and wonderful people here, and I'm kind of trying to scroll through. So I think what it does is it gives you Zoom gives you the kind of people who are sharing their video, but those who aren't sharing their video, I'm also watching you as well from time to time. So be rest assured. So welcome to our meetup on human behaviors, organizational catalysts for positive change. This is something that's very close to our heart, especially Mark and I. With regards from a coaching stance, and really the premise of this talk, this interactive workshop, really more than anything else, is kind of delving into the human aspects of organizational change. I think that's a nice way perhaps to sum this up. Now, before I kind of go into any more detail, I actually wanted to ask a question. I wasn't going to ask this, but I kind of just came into my head a few minutes ago. Most of you, I'd say, are familiar with Zoom. You'll notice you have a reactions button on the bottom of your bar. One is the clap, and one is the thumbs up. The question is, so use the thumbs up as an affirmative to the question. The question is, how many of you have had in your organizations any change initiative that has failed? And I don't necessarily mean agile change initiative, I just mean any kind of change initiative. So thumbs up if that is the case. I'm just going to scan through, I'd say a good third, if not a quarter, 3/4 now of my screen, first screen, and most of my second screen. So I would gather that's about 70% of the group. That's really interesting. Many of you have had agile coaches in to support you, consultants, everything from teams or few people in your organization who want or are desperate to kind of make things different, change things. Others have had, I'm sure, huge, kind of programs of work that have focused and delved into kind of an agile adoption, agile transformation, or any kind of organizational initiative. I'll kind of use that term as broadly as possible. The challenges we have with a lot of these kind of organizational change initiatives, many of which we've been involved with, and many of which have actually failed. Not all of them, but many of them have. And we can use kind of a different term for failure here, kind of in terms of sliding scale. Obviously, some value might come out of it, but it is really, really difficult. It is really, really tough to make changes stick. Often what you find, certainly those who are the customers, the sponsors, who are on the receiving end of that change, often what you find is when your coaches and your consultants disappear, everything tends to sort of go back to the way it was. And this is very, very common. And all us agile coaches, our agile coaches mean well. They really, consultants I've been a management consultant for my sins in the past. So even I meant well when I was in those organizations. But again, it's such a complex environment. There are so many moving parts. There are so many external influences, let alone internal influences, that it's difficult to make sense of this. Now, over the years, one of the things that I've come back to again and again, what we're going to share with you going forward is a model that I've, who needs another model, eh? But you know, it's a model that I've sort of come back to again and again over the years, and it's something that I think goes really deep, really deep in terms of its application. I've kind of looked at it on and off for years. I've explored it, I've studied it. I'm still nowhere near scratching the surface of this because it's such a great model. So what we're going to do over the next hour or so, I guess, is get you guys involved in the conversation, have a deep connection to your own personal experience, to interpersonal behaviors within your organization, how you as coaches have experienced it you as individuals have experienced it, also as coaches with other people, coaching other people, but also as observers, and actually how some of those tips and techniques focused on interpersonal behaviors can really help really push or catapult your change initiative, albeit agile adoption, if you like, into the next level. We'll share some stories. Mark and I will share some stories on this as well. A little bit. So before we continue, a little bit about me, and I'm going to hand over to Mark, and then we'll get you in straight into an exercise. I've been involved in, I suppose, in the agile sphere since about 2006, so about 14 years now. A lot of my time has been spent working closely with people. What I learned very early on as a Scrum Master, and I had some great managers really working with my managers. One thing I learned very early on was to think about the emotional parts of myself when dealing with people. I narrate this story. I was a coach at the BBC many years ago. And I remember having a very difficult time. I was working with producers at Radio 1 at the time. And if anyone's worked with producers in the media, you'll kind of know what I mean. They're very challenging people at times. And I remember going to my manager, who I hope he won't mind. I'll name him. His name's Richard Line. He's a fantastic guy. He really understands Agile well. And I think he might still be at the BBC. So look him up. He's a great guy. One of the best managers I've ever had. And he said to me, I came to him with a bit of a rant, and he said to me, Zia, just remove the emotion from that problem. Remove the emotion and focus on the actual problem, what's going on, and reflect on that. And that stayed with me forever. That one comment really set me off on a journey to reflect internally. And I suppose that's led me to where we are now, where I am now, and where we are now in terms of understanding the human impact in organizations, change in organizations, actually moving away a little bit from the structures, the scaling frameworks, the processes, which we all too easily jump towards, and focus on the human aspect of it. So that's where my journey really changed. And a lot of my experience has been, you know, in a multitude of environments, fintech, pharmaceutical, media, insurance, all that. I use the same principles, irrespective of the backdrop. I also use the same principles. So a lot of myself, I'm a coach, a professional coach with the ICF, and also a certified enterprise coach with the Scrum Alliance, and also a trainer. But that's enough about me. We'll explore more stories as we go. Mark, I'd like you to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, well, kind of going after you is a bit of an anticlimax, because it's kind of exactly the same almost in terms of some of the paths and things that we've been doing. I'm also a coach. I'm just going to talk about my passion really over the last 5 years. It's really been when I first got into Agile coaching, which was about 2007. At the time, I was from a software background, so it was all about Agile. Certainly the last 10 years, and probably accelerated through the last 5 years, very much kind of focusing more on the kind of coaching side of that. So as many of you know, almost anybody can call themselves an Agile coach. So I've really been trying to work over the last 5 years to help move the profession forward a little bit. Agile coaching is a bit ad hoc. How people do it is very hit and miss. So I remember a couple of years ago doing a session at the Agile Coaching Exchange. The last one I did was on the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel. Many of the people actually on this call have collaborated with me on that as well. So also I remember the Agile Coaching Exchange when in its early days was when I was working with Ben and Helen at ASOS. We tended to have the event then in a pub. It was at the Littleton Arms, just outside ASOS. So I shall have a beer later, but I've got a soft drink at the moment in remembrance of those days. Yeah, so glad to be here. And of course, ultimately, the reason for this session is it comes back, it's all about people. Zia, before you continue, let me just mention, so welcome to everybody who's just joined. There's probably some natural places to ask questions, probably just after we've had breakout sessions. So we'll pause for questions after we've had the first breakout session. So yeah.
Great, so thank you, Mark. So just listening to Mark there, one of the things I'm kind of inviting you to do is think quite deeply about what we're asking you here. A lot of what we're asking you is to perhaps go quite deep into your own personal experiences. And I think the more you're comfortable with sharing and the more you're comfortable reflecting, not necessarily with us in the wider group, but certainly in your breakout rooms, I think you'll get more of value. So we're going to set you off in a breakout now to kind of get you thinking about your own relationships with people in your workplace currently or in a workplace that's been a bit challenging or spiky. You as individuals, okay, just you having a relationship with others, certainly things that have been quite challenging. What made them challenging? What impact did they have on you? Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Share information with each other, share stories with each other. Mark, we've got, I believe, 7 minutes for this time box. I'm also looking at
here. 7 minute time box. Yeah,
okay.
as Zia said, pick something that's spiky. Pick something that maybe you'd wish you'd handled a little bit differently, because tonight you will have a chance to reflect, and maybe next time something similar happens, maybe take a different approach. So something that was spiky, something you want to reflect on, something you want to do differently next time.
What I'm going to do is I'll walk you through the model itself, and I will let me set the scene for you a bit, with a bit more detail, and Mark's going to share some of his experiences on this, and I'll give you more context and we'll take it from there. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you will be able to see this. So tell me if you can't see it, and you shout if you can't see it. This is our mural page that we've got here, which you can, which Mark will also share the link with. The model that I'm going to share with you is something called Learys Complex or Learys Row. Some of you have probably experienced this. Some of you are probably new to it. We're going to walk you through it a little bit. What I'm going to say from the outset of this model is that it is very, very deep. So we've only got a limited amount of time, and we're going to go through as much as we can. But even then, explore it. Learn more about what's going on in terms of model and what it's capable of. It's a model that survived for over 60 years. Who needs another model, right? But this one has been around since 1957. The author of this model is someone called Timothy Leary. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can see the model and observe it while I speak. Timothy Leary was a clinical psychologist. He was quite pivotal in the field of clinical psychology, and actually created a study around, wrote a paper in the late 50s around interpersonal behavior, I believe where this model came from, often known as Learys Complex or Learys Rows interchangeably. Leary was an interesting chap. He actually got a job with Harvard in the 60s, I believe, and he started a study in the 60s on the use of psychedelic drugs and the impact of psychedelic drugs on the brain. He's a really interesting character, and actually a lot of his outcomes came from the study kind of he shared was through this Rose. He actually got fired from Harvard because of that, which is really sad. But what's really interesting is that his work has lived on. Not many people cite it, but I've played around with this model directly in coaching since about 2012 and 13 when I first discovered it, and I'm still exploring it, and I think it's extremely powerful. So what is the model? Well, the model is actually set up quite simply. You'll notice, let's start with the outside circle. So you'll notice there are two axes. You've got, initially you've got at the top here, you've got above dominance. These are very dominant behavioral traits. What Leary said, I might add, or I should add actually, is that he believed that you could map in this circumplex and these segments, you could map pretty much all of human behavior. That's what's really interesting about his theory here. So he would say that you could map all of human behavior, which is something he tried to do here, and actually use this model to actually both reflect yourself, this is how I've used it, but also reflect with others in terms of your interpersonal relationship with others, but also more importantly, as a coach, watching this play through between two or more people, perhaps in your organization. And I'm talking at any level here, guys, not just in your team or your Scrum team. This is anything, right? 2 people or more people in your organization and how they're behaving. So the model itself, the above dominance part really talks about I would call them they feel very heavy characteristics: domination, being narcissistic, being competitive, autocratic, managerial. You kind of get what I mean by that. And that's the top end of the circle. So all the kind of traits on the outer edge of the circle are extreme traits. These are traits or behavioral traits that we wouldn't really want to see in people, or certainly would dominate a room or a group of people in some way. Naturally, at the bottom, you've got submission, self-effacing, docile kind of behavior. On the right, we've got love and togetherness, so kind of a person who focuses on us, we, is always kind of hyper normal in their view of the world, and loving and caring. And equally on the opposite side, we've got hate, which is aggressive, rebellious behavior, distrustful behavior, and so on. Now, while I'm talking through this, some of you have probably recognized already some of the kind of conversations you've had, things that you've experienced. Now, what's interesting about this is, as we get closer into the center of the circle, you'll notice that the behavioral traits become more sensible or more natural. And what I mean by that is, let's take, for example, the segment around responsibility. So I'm just going to use a pen here to kind of to circle some of these. Let me get a nice color here. So sort of, if we look at this one here, at the extreme end, we're talking about, you know, having someone who has a sense of extreme responsibility, is compulsive, taking over all the time, but really from a point of togetherness, really from the point of, you know, think of the Scrum mum kind of mentality, you know, that kind of person who's always doting on people. What you want that person to be, or not necessarily want that person, what you're looking for perhaps is more focus on help, offering help, or being a giver of advice. That's kind of a natural, healthy, is the term I'm looking for, healthy behavioral trait. Now, not everybody is going to be perfectly in the middle. I don't think you're ever going to meet a person, including yourself, who's going to be perfectly in the middle. But what's interesting about this is that we all exhibit different types of behavioral traits. But we largely, from my understanding and what I've understood in my research, we largely fall into a certain pattern. Now, what's interesting here is a couple of things that I just want to note. There are some opposing behaviors. So, for example, let's get a pen here. If I've got someone who is being very dominant in the room, or someone who has a very domineering focus and behavior, they will naturally trigger submission in people. Now, you've seen these conversations happen in front of you. They will immediately push a group of people or a person into submissive, weak position. And that's very hard for some people to get out of, especially if you're an introvert. It's very hard for you to come out of that, right? You know, you really need to work hard on that. Equally, if you are coming from a point of submission, or, you know, kind of someone who has low self-esteem, you're going to promote or provoke a dominant behavioral trait. That's a kind of very typical kind of play or role play you see in organizations. Another interesting thing about this model as a trigger point is that what they say is togetherness promotes togetherness, and opposition sort of creates or initiates opposition. Now, what we're finding, or what you will find, of course, is that if you have someone in this position here, that's sitting in this position here, if you also take this stance, well, you're going to have a big old conflict on your hands. And of course, you've seen that play out a lot as well. So we've seen a lot of these sort of behaviors played out. What I'm going to say is we're going to show you ways to manage some of those behaviors, and I will share some ways that I've managed those behaviors as well. But think of this as almost, the way I see it, as a social compass in a way. It's a way for me to navigate my own experience of myself and how I behave with other people, but also as a coach, another dynamic as a coach, it helps me identify certain patterns and behavioral traits that are going on. One thing that also really aligns on top of Leary very nicely is that of transactional analysis and Eric Berne's work. And I'm not going to go into that because that's a whole different talk, perhaps for another day. But if you look at Eric Berne's work around interpersonal behaviors, it sits really nicely with a lot of what Leary talks about and how this stuff plays out. Okay, now I'm going to leave it there because we'll expand the model as we go a little bit. But I'm actually going to hand over to Mark, who's going to take us through.
You wanted to talk about me a bit, didn't we?
Yeah.
Let's zoom in on me. So you can zoom in on me there. So what you can also do online is there's a various number, I believe, Zia, of different surveys that you can fill in yourself to kind of do a self-assessment. We're not going to do that tonight, but we just kind of, I took the liberty of doing that for myself, just so we can kind of unpeel me a little bit. So, I mean, I'm an Agile coach, so maybe as you might expect, on the right hand side, most of my stronger tendencies tend to be towards the kind of love axis there that Zia was talking about. So on the right hand side, doing things together. Hopefully, at my heart, I'm a very, very collaborative person. However, the interesting thing that kind of came out when I did this was that I also have some kind of quite dominant and strong characteristics on the kind of dominant hate kind of top left quadrant of the rows here as well. I'm gonna apparently I have some almost quite narcissistic tendencies, which means they certainly had a chuckle about. But I've definitely it definitely resonates with me that I can be in situations where I provoke inferiority, but it's a certain context that happens. It's probably when I'm enthusiastic about something. If Mark has an idea, I probably start jumping up and down going, ooh, 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 and then I have to get it out. And of course, that might also then start to kind of dominate the room as well. Obviously, with Zia being here, I'm trying to take a much more submissive stance generally tonight as well. That's my general approach for this evening. But it can happen, and I have a tendency that means I can go there. But just because I can go strong in any of these behaviors doesn't mean I'm always going to be there, because otherwise I'd be quite an extreme person if I was maxing out on all of these things. But given that I can go there, maybe when I'm contracting with people or working with people, I can tell them what to look for and how to help me and ultimately have better situations. I mean, another one on the provides inferiority is Helen and Ben have both co-trained with me. And Helen is always joking with me that, oh, it's the Mark show. And that's probably me sometimes when I'm in my training stance, going towards that, that tendency there sometimes. I saw somebody had a hand up. Yaz.
Hi. Is this personal or situational? I mean, is it this rose thing, this, you know, this kind of characteristics, are they to do with the individual or the situation that the individual is in? Because, you know, as an Agile coach, one of the things that you've got here is you provoke hostility. Well, you know, we were talking about earlier on about people who are resistant to change. Now, that's hostility that's provoked, but not necessarily part of your psyche or your psychological makeup. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, come on, go for it.
Yeah, I think the answer is it's both. So the rose shows that you have this capability to exhibit these behaviors. I mean, I can also talk about the opposite. So I'm very unlikely to kind of go towards the rebellious, the bottom left kind of thing, because I just don't, that's just not me. But I have got the tendency to go towards that where the kind of competitive narcissist. But it is context specific. So based on the context, certain things are maybe more likely to trigger me. So actually, the more you become aware of what your triggers are, the more actually, as a coach, you can actually get self-control. And that is also, of course, one way that you can think about using this model.
Okay.
Exactly that. I don't have any more to add to that point itself. What we're going to do, Yaz, is we're going to unpack this a little bit more for you in terms of what Mark's showing you here is about himself, and obviously just actually while we're on this, just at the bottom left of the mural, I'll show you here. We're going to leave this on here so you can actually take it off. The actual little test is here. I actually dug it out. I think there are a few online. Actually, this is the original one that I had many years ago, and actually, so you have a play with it. All the guidance and instructions are in there. All it says is be honest and answer questions as quickly as you can. Of course, we're not going to do that here, but it is really eye-opening. It's I ran this kind of activity with a team actually many years ago, just as a bit of fun. And by the way, the letters correspond to answers on the test, and it kind of just allows you to kind of map yourself when you're getting your results on there. But again, at the same time, it's as Mark said, it's a snapshot. It's a snapshot of where you are at right now. Of course, there are people. What's really great about this is there are people, even if they are on the extremities in certain areas, there are ways to sort of bring them back, and that's kind of what we're going to reflect on in a moment. But it is really difficult if you have someone who is constantly or has narcissistic tendencies, boastful tendencies within a team or within a group. It's very difficult to deal with those people. There are people who always live on the edge on any of these sorts of things, and it's very difficult to, let alone have an interpersonal relationship with them, let alone kind of coach them at the same time. So these things they're quite powerful just with that. Mark, was there any more you wanted to add to this?
No, I think we might come back to it after the next workshop-y bit. So let me just say what the rest of the plan is for the session. We're going to have another breakout now, just to give you a chance to explore the rows a little bit. In fact, I'm going to put this, I've put it in the chat now. You can, hopefully in your groups, you should now be able to kind of click that link and get into this mural, just so that it's available to you when you go into your breakout rooms. We don't need you to interact with it, just kind of move around and have a look at the different sections. So thinking of the relationship that you had in mind on the first activity, just explore the rows and try and maybe make some notes and talk about in your group some of the behaviors that were present in the relationship that you had in mind in your previous conversation. Okay, so again, let's go for, I'm going to ask to go for 5 minutes this time, if that's okay.
Yeah, really quick 5 minutes. Okay, so thank you for participating. Hold your thoughts, because what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through a couple of scenarios, and then we're going to go through another final breakout, I guess, where we're going to really get you guys to think about some strategies to solve. So I'm going to share my screen again, and I kind of want you to kind of follow along a little bit. So you've obviously had an interesting conversation, perhaps starting to get some ideas now of how powerful this rose potentially is, and kind of how it helps you map certain kind of human behaviors within your organization and interpersonal relationships as well. There are a couple of scenarios I want to go through with you. They're actually in the guidance as well, where it says guidance. They're actually listed there, so I won't be looking at that, but I'm just gonna kind of talk you very briefly through a scenario. So say there's a person who kind of exhibits very dominant behavior. I'm going to go for bright red here. Dominant behavior. So someone who's very much operating in kind of this kind of space. This kind of person is very hard to deal with. And as I mentioned before, what you're going to end up doing very naturally is going to more of a submissive position. And you're going to get people who are just going to say yes and completely shut down essentially, and that's, you know, that's something you've probably observed at a number of levels. Now, interestingly, rather than being in this position, which is not something you want to do, what you can do to help that person come to the center of the rows. So what you're wanting to do is really get that person calmed down. Remember, Mark said something really interesting. This isn't like a you know, an on all the time behavioral trait. This is certain things might trigger it, certain things, certainly from my experience, certain things would trigger it, certain conversations might trigger it, and you will be in a situation where this is happening. So what you would be doing is you would actually meet them in something around the idea of dominant love. So you'd be actually somewhere here. You'd be actually asking very calmly open questions, giving them time to respond, giving them time to let off steam, and actually being very, very clear in what you're actually needing from them. So that kind of dominant love position in a way is what or dominant together position. So you're not submissive, but you're actually being very clear in what you require of them in terms of open questions, powerful questions. I've done this before a number of times, especially when someone gets upset about something in a team or in a situation. And actually coaches will very naturally, great coaches very naturally do this. They'll hold the room and hold that space. But the key thing is give them time to let off steam, and give them time to answer your questions. So what you're doing then is you're actually bringing them back sort of closer to this sort of sensible, healthy center to have a conversation with you. Another scenario I just wanted to go through very quickly is whereby you've got someone who is perhaps saying yes all the time. So I'm going to choose a different color for this. This is perhaps someone who is being, let's say, sort of, you know, well, I mean, I guess more docile. So they're probably operating in this space. They're being docile. So this is a person who kind of cooperates or wants to cooperate all the time. And every time you ask them anything, they always say, yep, I can do that. Yep, that's possible. And you're not really getting anything much from them. What this person also will do sometimes is they will actually complain a lot by, you know, I'm never being heard. No one ever gives me an opportunity to reflect. So what you might do here, interestingly, is where you've got someone here, you might decide very naturally to come here as well, right? You might think, well, you would be overly supportive in that case. Well, actually, what's interesting is that won't work. This is the kind of coach who rushes to answer the questions, rushes to dote on that individual, rushes to kind of, you know, say, you know, it'll be fine, let's do this, let's do that. Again, you're just kind of mirroring the same behavior. What you want to do is act submissive friendly. So you kind of want to kind of come into this space here, which is more the submissive friendly part. So you're kind of operating in the same level, but you're being a bit more clear. Again, these are all open questions, clarifying kind of what their needs are, expressing support for the individual really, and allowing them space to reflect. Now, interestingly, what you'll probably find is a lot of these are good standard coaching practices. Well, they are, absolutely. So this is where it becomes really powerful, because you're using what you already know, all of you already know as coaches, you're using this in the context of a very powerful behavioral framework, a kind of a interpersonal relationship framework. So those are just a couple of things that, you know, a couple of scenarios that I wanted to walk you through. We wanted to show you of how you might work. There are kind of, I would say there are right and wrongs here. Obviously, what you wouldn't want to do in the first position of the dominant person is come in with dominance, because that will cause conflicts. But one thing I do suggest is that you do play around with this safely, of course, to try out what works. But really, in terms of, one thing is, there's two parts to this. One thing is the kind of, obviously the powerful questions and so on you're asking, but also it's where you are personally. What you don't want to do is be asking, you know, in the first position, dominant position, asking very aggressive, powerful questions in a kind of very aggressive way, because it's still going to give you the same feedback. It's going to give you that kind of conflict zone. So what you're doing all the while, the key principle here is you're trying to kind of get people to kind of focus somewhere in the middle. And at that point in time, to bring them somewhere in the center so you can have a healthy conversation. Now, what we're going to do right now is we're going to get you guys to deal with, well, to think about everything you've been speaking about in your breakout rooms and think of some strategies. Mark, do you want to kind of elaborate on that for the group of what they're going to do next?
Yeah, let me set that up. So I think we heard from people earlier on that change is difficult, not just agile change, any kind of change, because ultimately it involves people. Some people don't want to change, but of course, looking at this, maybe we have that person who is the disruptor, maybe we have resistance, maybe we have negative behaviors, but actually we can influence change in people by choosing the behaviors that we or the stances that we take here. So this is what we want you to think about. Given your scenario and your situation, what would you do differently in the future if you met somebody with similar behaviors that you were interacting with? Maybe think about some of the strategies that Zia has been mentioning. What behaviors would you choose in the future? And then what strategies might support that? You know, Zia's mentioned powerful questioning, mirroring. You know, how would you work with that person? Make sense?
Yeah, and I also add to that, just be playful with it, right? And you know, those are two scenarios. I don't have all the scenarios. You might have a mixture of things going on, and just think of what feels natural to you guys as well, and have a play with that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, so the point of being in a group is so that you can, there's no real right answers, but you can debate, oh, well, if these were the behaviors, if I then take on these behaviors, what might then happen? Okay, let's say 8 minutes for this breakout.
So welcome back, guys. So I was just finishing off a quick thing with Simon, just to talk through. So this model generally isn't very prescriptive. I think that's how I see it. And while we did walk through some nice scenarios there, giving you examples of where you could put yourself in terms of interpersonal discussion with someone, the whole purpose of this section, or the last section, was for you to explore what you might do differently based on some of the experiences you've had. There's no right or wrong here, but certainly putting yourself somewhere on that circumflex will elicit a response from that person in that situation. So really what we're saying here is, as coaches, you know, reflect a little bit on the rows. Like I said right at the beginning, it goes much deeper than just an hour conversation. Read about it, reflect on it, see how it might help you. But there are a few things I want to go to Q&A before we leave, because there are some people that do have to leave. But all I was going to say was that there's a number of ways this can help you. Just to recap, the first way is that it can help you reflect on yourself as an individual in a system, in an organization, in a relationship. It can help you, your interpersonal relationships with others, one-to-one or one-to-many. It can also help you as a coach primarily about how you see these things playing out, and how people interact with each other, and how those interpersonal, how you can facilitate conversations. But actually, one of the key things aside to this, the deeper element, going back to the title of this session, which is this idea of a catalyst for positive change in organizations. What we're referring to here is when agile coaches turn up to organizations and coach, what they need to be doing is coaching people in and around their interpersonal behaviors, their human behaviors with each other. In your organization, we term this word culture a lot. Culture is banded around, and I don't think many people really understand culture. I understand culture as the personality of the organization, and you make that personality of the organization. People make up that personality. So culture isn't going to be changed by working with leadership only, or looking at kind of some elaborate frameworks, or looking at other aspects of organizational systems change. What it really comes down to for me is how people behave with each other, and how willing they are to take on a change initiative. Many of the organizational change or valuable or successful organizational change initiatives I've been involved with, when I haven't really coached in Agile per se, or as an Agile adoption, or in context. I've coached people. All I've done is I've worked with certain people, albeit some kind of transformation team, but I've identified where certain people need support, and I've helped and trained others to do the same thing. So when we become redundant as coaches in organizations, that those changes stick and those changes remain, because that organization takes life on its own. What you'll notice is on the mural as well, we put the 10 principles of enterprise change on there, which is where human behaviors come from. That's for you to download. That's where a group of us in the Copenhagen coaching retreat came up with this very focus around, we need to move away from prescriptive frameworks, so to speak, even if they are loose rules of how to do things, and more about interpersonal behaviors, coaching and motives and purpose, and even limiting beliefs and challenging those in organizational systems. That's where real change can occur. Now that's hard because there's no book telling you how to do it. There's no framework that you just take and wave in front of someone in the leadership team and they say, right, you're in, let's do that for 6 months or 12 months. It's something you really have to work at as coaches. And what I found, going back to the interpersonal relationship or behavioral complex, so complex by Leary, is it's one of many, but certainly one of the most powerful tools I've experienced as a coach, where it really does help organizational change matter and mean something. So I'm going to leave it there because we are close to 8 o'clock. As you're probably aware, Mark and I can talk about this with you, and I'm sure you guys forever as well. But we'll open it up to kind of just questions, and feel free, anyone, to pitch in, ask questions, and also answer them. If there's any in the chat.
Yeah, Neil's put one in the chat. So where does this model fit with servant leadership? This model was obviously created 50 years before servant leadership. Neil.
Well, yeah, crikey, who would like to answer that? Where do you think this model might fit with servant leadership, or servant leadership as a concept or transformer? Anyone want to answer that?
I was hoping you would.
I will have to go. I'm going to answer that, but I want to hear from someone else.
I think there's an element of I think people think submissiveness is weakness sometimes. It isn't necessarily weakness. In terms of, you could think about a branch of a tree, giving with the wind, in a sense. It's actually because it's stronger, it's actually giving in those situations. And I think the ability to, I think servant leadership is perhaps on this might be defined as the ability to have the emotional intelligence to find the trajectory that will form collaboration and make progress in as best a harmonized way without creating the hostilities. So I think there's certainly a map in there would be something I would say, but there is also a tendency for servant leadership, certainly from Scrum Master, to sort of turn into sort of administration, mothering if we're not careful. I think you touched on that earlier as well, but that would be my attempt at answering it.
That's great. Brilliant, Tom. Thank you, Rochelle.
I mean, something I'd say on that is I think a mistake that some people make about servant leadership is they kind of think it's just about being submissive. And it's not. It's
absolutely not. No.
It's almost all of that right-hand side. So anything towards the for me, servant leadership is everything that you do. And it might be quite forceful actually, but it's done with love. It's done with
passion, right? It's done with
everything you do is
the mission in mind, right?
It's to help people.
Yeah.
Everything to do is to help people. So it's definitely more towards that love side.
Yeah, servant leadership to me is a state of mind. Personally, that's how I see it. It's a state of mind and a state of being, and it's actually very anti-ego. You have to have. So someone who has ego is not going to be a great servant leadership. When I say ego, everyone has an ego, of course. Someone who thrives on their ego and is bruised easily. You are in service to others. Greenfield talked about this idea of Greenleaf, talked about this idea of servant leadership being you are in service to a group of people, and you always leave people in a better place than when you found them. That takes a lot of energy and selflessness to do. This model it works with that very nicely on a number of levels, but also goes beyond that. It talks of, the best thing you can do with anybody is help them become a better version of themselves. This model helps you do that.
While servant leadership is about, yes, it's true, it's about leading people, but it's about leading a team. And sometimes an individual does get left behind. I mean, you know, not wanting to out myself out as a Trekkie fan, but you know, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. You know, as Spock said in his dying words on God knows whichever bloody movie it was. You know, sometimes an individual needs to be. I hate to use the word sacrifice, but you know, if that individual is being that disruptive, problematic to the team, you know, your responsibility is to the team. Ultimately, your responsibility is to, you know, the organization you work for, and the team that you're leading is supposed to be producing products for that organization. But you know, that's where your ultimate responsibility is. And while it's always admirable to focus on individuals or people, if those people don't, again, it's a really bad phrase, toe the line, you know, are not malleable enough to kind of get where you're trying to get to, then sometimes they will fall by the wayside. Sorry, I'm making it sound really terrible, but you know,
I love the insights. Yes, I love it.
Wrath of Khan, I think it was.
That was it, the Wrath of Khan.
That one, whoever did that. Okay, another question. Another question. Anyone else? We've got a minute or two. Anybody else?
Is there anything in the chat? I mean, I was gonna ask the inverse. Does anybody see any conflict between the Circumplex and servant leadership?
So conflict in terms of application, Eben, is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm just wondering if we were asking how do they fit. I'm just wondering, you know, what drives that question? Do we see any conflict between those models? Is there some place where they say different things or lead you in different directions?
Well, I mean, I don't see any conflicts just because I think the rose itself, it's a model and it's not prescriptive. It's supposed to just be helpful in terms of you identifying what particular kind of relationships exist in a particular situation or on a team. And I think for all of us, we have that kind of perceptive nature where we can figure out when we enter a room what the different players are like. So I think it's not prescriptive, and I don't think there's any conflict to servant leadership.
Yes, if you had the map for this for like the team and everything, it's like a color wheel, really, isn't it? You can say there's going to be some conflict between this. You could almost predict the conflict, I suppose, if you actually had a, you know, honest assessment from everybody on there in that regard, because there's going to be conflict between two human beings at some point.
Is there a book about that you can read up on this stuff? I just had a quick look on Lery's Rose on Wikipedia, and it's pretty scant. I was just wondering if there was any text.
There are. There's nothing much in the way of. There's Lery's original paper which you can still read. That's available in archives, archive.org, I think, which is probably the best thing to read, to be honest. There are a number of books on his experiments with psychedelics, which I haven't read, but I'm sure they'd be interesting. But interestingly, yeah, you'd be surprised. There's nothing actually concrete on the rose, which unless if someone finds something, of course. So I've been reading his paper, and also other people and other areas, other psychologists, and I've been on courses where we've discussed this. So it's kind of, I've kind of pieced my own experience with this in my own way. But yeah, if anyone does find any kind of interesting publication, do share. But interesting on Eben's question, we can get hung up on servant leadership a little bit. I mean, it is one of many mindsets, approaches, ways of being in a system or in a team with one or more people or a group of people. And obviously we come from that, from the point of a Scrum Master, so to speak, typically as an Agile coach, perhaps as well. To me, that nothing is black and white here. They all kind of support each other in their own way. And I think one of the things I just want to leave you with is make sense of this in your own way. You know, one of the things that I've been very fortunate to do, and the people that I've been, my peer group and people that have mentored me over the years have really trusted me to just make sense of things in my own way, right? And, you know, one of the things that I have done with this, Rose, is actually experimented with the things that with the conflicts that I shared with you and we walked through. Those are real things that I've done with people. I've seen those happen, and I've seen people change over a period of time for the better. That helps others, you know, generally have a better existence in an organization, and that can only be a positive feedback loop that we're looking for. It's very difficult for us coaches to create positive feedback loops in the organization. David Gray, in his book Liminal Thinking, talks about doom loops. It's very easy to get into doom loop thinking. It takes one small trigger and everything starts falling apart. And it's our job as coaches to avoid that, or, you know, make sure as much as possible that that's caught early and that we can manage it. This Rose kind of helps map that in a way, for want of a better term, and help us navigate that, which I think is very, very powerful.
So I just like to say as well, everybody think about, you know, we're not transforming organizations. We're just helping people be a little bit better, as good as they can be. We're helping people basically. And this is just one more tool, another window in terms of how we look at the world that might help us do this kind of thing.
And Mark, to add on onto that thing as well, so I've just been really a big fan of James Clear right now with the Atomic Habits thing. And it's astonishing that just 1% change, you know, making 1% change, whatever, after 10 months or whatever it is, makes 238% improvement. So you even just need to make, as you said, those little changes through habits or whatever approach to make a real difference.
Yeah, I just finally saying, just on Mark's point, I do thoroughly believe and very wholeheartedly believe that, you know, this can help change your organization. And that's the whole point of human behaviors, focusing on that. It's not to say the other stuff isn't important. All your frameworks and all the processes and those systems and those things we play with, they are important. But really, this is where you need to start from, because you will see these behaviors permeate through the organization and create a personality that matters, a culture, therefore, that matters and will matter to people. And that they own, I think, is a key thing. Sorry,
okay, we best hand back to Ben
now. It's really interesting hearing where the conversation's gone, actually, and this is one of the things where we probably do miss being in Littleton Arms, because we can gather in our little groups afterwards with a beer and all that. So hopefully, you know, that time will come back. I would just have a little ask. Zia, I think you mentioned a paper, and I think Rochelle, you mentioned a particular bit of reading, and I think a few other people have contributed things in the chat. What would be really helpful? Would you mind putting a comment on the event page for today? That would be really helpful to just help people find some of that, which is probably what we'd have been doing if we were in the pub anyway. So that'd be really, really helpful. I want to thank Mark and Zia for bringing that to us tonight. It's been really great to see so many people engaged and sharing in this conversation and bringing their own experiences. And I feel it's funny that we've mentioned the social element at the beginning tonight in the poll, and it's almost like we've got a little bit of that back in some kind of serendipitous way. So it's really great to see that. But beyond that, I just want to say thanks again to Mark and Zia, and thanks for all of you for being so involved tonight. And I wish you the best rest of the evening and really good rest of the week. Thank you.
yes,
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Really
you.
great.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Bye.
cheers, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Danke.